As we very quietly approach another round of Supreme Court confirmation hearings starting Monday, it's always comforting to believe that the court is going to sort it all out. That's why these confirmation fights and getting the right justices on the bench are so important. Our Constitution protects our rights, and our court protects our Constitution, or at least that's how it should work if the justices actually perform their jobs as assigned and apply the law as it's written, not as they want it to be. But the court, like any of our other institutions, is just made up of people. And so our Constitution and the rights it enshrines are only as safe as the people in that institution consider them. When their oaths to uphold the Constitution are just as loose as their connections with reality, well, then the Constitution doesn't get upheld. Instead, it gets morphed and misshapen into bizarre distortions at best, or just completely disregarded at worst. And that's because it is just a piece of paper. And pieces of paper are great for noting concepts, but they have no actual defense mechanism, either for themselves or for you, even if they're designed to do that. The piece of paper relies on us to defend it, not the other way around. And if we don't, well, then it's worth even less than a roll of toilet paper. At least the toilet paper has some mass to it. You could probably throw it and hit somebody in the head in a defense situation. And in the coming economy, it's surely a safer store of value than the dollar. Probably a better fire starter, too. The only defense mechanism the Constitution has is our societal commitment to it and the explicit oath to it that our judges and other officials take to support and defend the Constitution first, to apply its neutral set of rules no matter what your personal preferences in any given case may be. Constitution first, personal preferences aside, anything else, and we'll be a country of the rule of whims instead of a country of the rule of law. And maybe that's an ask that's just too tall for most people, to apply a system of rules instead of the urges of your personal emotion. And I get it. When you want a certain outcome and you hold the power to create that outcome, it can be very tempting just to do it and rationalize your way through. But that's exactly why we don't ask most people to do this job, the job of Supreme Court Justice. It's not a job that's for everybody. It's a job for an elite few. It's a job for a person with a very rare combination of a brain big enough to process centuries of case law, plus a temperament strong enough to understand that the integrity of the law is much more important than his personal feelings. And there aren't too many of that type. The natural rarity of that sort of person is an obstacle, but they can be molded. It's just the trouble now is that the mold to make them is itself corrupted too. The factories are broken. Case in point, if there was any place in the country where such rare things were possible, where thoughtful people could discuss difficult topics as a matter of principle rather than emotion, a Yale Law School free speech event should be just that sort of place. The smartest legal prospects, allegedly, with the most experienced legal guests, this should be the place where the intellectual rigor happens, except, of course, it isn't. Just like everywhere else, this is now a place where the cry-bullies assemble to shout their indignation at anybody who dares challenge them. On March 10th, the Yale Federalist Society hosted Monica Miller of the Progressive American Humanist Association and Kristen Waggoner of the Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative nonprofit that promotes religious liberty. You may remember Waggoner as the lawyer who argued the famous Masterpiece Cake Shop case before the Supreme Court in late 2017. The case where the court determined that the state of Colorado acted wrongfully by trying to force baker Jack Phillips to bake a gay wedding cake. So why would progressive and conservative legal interest groups cooperate at this event? Well, because it's on that all-important shared principle of free speech, of course. Both groups took the same side on a 2021 Supreme Court case, the case of a Christian Georgia college student who was restricted in various ways from promoting his faith on campus. And the case was a little more complicated and technical. It centered on whether damages the student was seeking could still be awarded if the policy had since been changed. But the point here is that these two ideological opponents found common principle on this free speech issue. They fought together for it, and they won a nearly unanimous decision at the Supreme Court. And they came to Yale Law School to discuss with the country's brightest young legal minds how that principle and standing up for it is much more important than any personal or ideological animosity they may have for each other. But of course, those bright young legal minds didn't want to hear it. And as usual, not wanting to hear it doesn't just mean not attending the event and going about your business instead. It means disrupting the event to obstruct anybody else who might like to hear it. And so they brought their signs and their shouting voices and their clenched fists and their stompy feet, and they accused Wagner and the Alliance for Defending Freedom of anti-gay and anti-trans bigotry and hatred, and they showed once again that our elite academic institutions are anything but. It was the same sort of clown show you'd find in any community college gender studies class. In a room that can't hold much more, 120 student protesters showed up to shout the event down and became irate when the hosting law professor explained the rules to them.
Can I ask you all, as you know, Yale has a policy of freedom of speech. And that guys, come on, grow up.
The grow up comment from the professor there was apparently in response to several of the protesters giving her the finger, according to the Washington Free Beacon's reporting, saying they have video of that happening, though I haven't seen the video. But more to the point of the dispute, these students think that occupying a speaker's space and shouting down the speech is free speech, and they ridicule the professor for not knowing this supposed First Amendment tradition.
They told him, Monica Miller, this is what it would be. Will those trans kids grow up?
This is I look forward to hearing from you when we get to question and answer.
Free speech is what you're allowed to talk here, and
no, you're disrupting the free speech.
You're disrupting us.
The disrupted is our talk. I remind you, Yale is committed to protecting freedom of expression and peaceful dissent. Interfering with the speaker's ability to speak. That includes me. Includes them.
Aren't you a First Amendment student? Generally, the role of student means listening to absorb information from people who understand material better than you do, and then asking questions when the time comes. If you just want to yell your opinions at other people, you can do that out on the sidewalk for free. But of course, it's not about actually learning anything. She just wants her bossiness to get a Yale stamp of legitimacy, so people have to listen to it in the future, even if that means completely undermining the values that give that stamp any legitimacy. Eventually, these protesters did leave or were removed. One of them reportedly yelled, "Fuck you," to the hosting Federalist Society on the way out. Another reportedly said to an ADF member, "I will literally fight you, bitch." And then they stood outside stomping and chanting. Other classes were disrupted by the noise, according to professors and students speaking with the Free Beacon anonymously. When the event concluded, the speakers needed police escort from the building. You heard the activists say that they are being disrupted just by this event even happening on campus at all, as though they were captured and forced to attend it. An extension of that logic is that if you even attend this event with an open mind, you too are the enemy. The student protesters distributed and posted flyers informing attendees that they are listening to a Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group. Never mind, the SPLC's entire business model is cashing in on its own hatred for others. But if you attend, you are personally complicit in legitimizing a hate group. And perhaps through similar browbeating tactics, these activists got a majority of the Yale Law School student body, nearly 400 students, to sign an open letter to school leadership condemning the event and ironically decrying the presence of armed police, which of course their own antics made necessary, as though the school was adversarial to them anyway. One of the people to whom that letter is addressed is Ellen Cosgrove, the associate dean of the law school, who reportedly just sat through this nonsense and allowed it to happen. No intervention, despite knowing it violated the school's policies on disruption. The student protesters' response to the event was so bad it inspired still more unlikely common ground between the two opposing lawyers. They both agreed in ripping the students. Monica Miller, the progressive, who herself agrees that the ADF is a hate group and said that at this event, said afterward, "Our inability to cooperate for the sake of broader principle is a much bigger problem than any one wrong opinion." Quote, "As lawyers, we have to put aside differences and talk to opposing counsel. If you can't talk to your opponents, you can't be an effective advocate." Correct. It should be a given premise that being a lawyer necessarily means associating with and working with very bad people, often on their behalf. I thought the point of being a lawyer was that even sleazeballs deserve their day in court. Take the points of these protesters to their logical extent. Should murderers not get a legal defense? Should we just shout shame at them like Cersei on the way to the gallows instead? Should we settle civil matters by just looking at how the parties voted instead of the facts of the case. Do the principles of the legal process apply to everyone, even if that person actually is the scum of the earth or not? Because if not, we don't have a legal process. We just have a shouting match. And shouting matches often turn violent. And if the young minds of Yale Law School, a majority of those young minds, if the signatures on that letter are to be believed, don't understand or reject those concepts, well, get ready for that chaos, because they're the ones destined to create and enforce it. As the ADF lawyer Kristen Wagoner said in agreement with the progressive lawyer, quote, Yale law students are our future attorneys, judges, legislators, and corporate executives. We must change course and restore a culture of free speech and civil discourse at Yale and other law schools, or the future of the legal profession in America is in dire straits. And to her point, 4 of the 9 current Supreme Court justices are Yale Law School alumni: Sam Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, Clarence Thomas, even Sonia "What does the 10th Amendment mean" Sotomayor. So, in fairness, maybe the credibility has been lacking for a little while at this institution, but overall, 11 Yale Law alumni have served on the bench in the Supreme Court's history. That's second only to Harvard, meaning there's a pretty decent shot there was a future Supreme Court justice in that room full of hecklers, convinced that his or her own righteous indignation is more important than the law itself. And if not that, then probably a future high-profile lawyer who will argue to convince a future justice anyway. And there are future congressmen and future senators and future chief officers of whatever corporate bullshit will dictate how you work and how you live and how you think. Because these people believe much more in their own moral superiority to rule over you than they do in the basic moral truth that you should be free to set those terms for yourself. And if that's the philosophy that'll define the law of the land, there will be no law of the land, just emotionally unstable people with weapons and no concept of the restraint or principle necessary to wield them. So in that scenario, it's probably a lot wiser to think about how we'll defend ourselves rather than have faith that these people and the institutions they control will defend us. Because once this logic extends from law school hypothetical to courtroom reality, they won't. We'll hold up and point to that piece of paper and they'll laugh, rightfully mocking us for believing that they ever even cared about it at all, when they showed us consistently they never did. If we trust these people to defend our rights on principle when they explicitly tell us they will not, well, then it's fair to ask, who are the real clowns? Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.